Hey everyone. So anyone who has been basically having a pulse and also not in a coma has probably heard that conservatives have decided to weaponize a particular term. The term is grooming. And one of the things that is really disturbing about this is that it seems to work for them in a couple ways politically. And I think our goal tonight is to kind of talk about that, but also talk about why this is just demonstrably untrue. Because what they're essentially doing, and we'll talk about this more with the article we're going to go over, is that grooming in its technical term is either about personally, caretaking oneself, but it also has a much more darker meaning referring to the idea that you are basically sort of manipulating a person who is underage towards some particular end. Usually a CSA one, but not always, sometimes to other ends. Now, what conservatives are doing is essentially trying to reframe the word into a use against LGBT people. This is nothing new. The LGBT has always been framed as somehow negative or bad for children. This is what the kink at pride discourse is. This is which God forbid that happens again this year. I'm serious, he needs to forbid it. But also the ways in which gay men were framed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the ways in which we talk about trans youth, the whole irreparable damages thing where, young white girls are being seduced by transgenderism, which bears sparkling similarity to the racist tropes about white girls being seduced by black men. Again, white supremacy and transphobia go together hand in hand. They're like chocolate and peanut butter, but disgusting. So the idea is that they're now using this term in a very different way. And one of the problems is that this is by its nature sort of ironic because conservatives, by their nature, are the ones that seem to be more likely to groom. Examples of this would be TERFs grooming detransitioned people into being weaponized and being tokens. This would be true with the way conservative legislatures have fought to end child marriage in the United States. There are dozens of states that still allow child marriage, and the conservatives like it this way because it allows for them to be able to get younger girls who they can then manipulate into being in relationships with older men. This has always been the goals of conservatives. Why have a partner who is actually a fully, functioning, thinking adult when you can just, manipulate one from scratch? So with that said, we found an article by PolitiFacts that seems pretty solid, and we wanted to talk about it today because it feels like there needs to be more pushback on this and more understanding, because the use of this not only is harmful to LGBT people, that is, it's going to be, something that is weaponized against us, but it is something that is by its nature just demonstrably false. So if your time is short, we can go over the very basics, but it says here, grooming is a term strongly associated with child sexual abuse. It refers to a process or set of behaviors adults use to make it easier to introduce or complete sexual interactions with a child. Yeah, or wait till they're an adult. Sometimes you can groom them that direction too. I've worked with a number of clients who that's been a thing. Talking about gender identity and sexual orientation in the classroom would not be grooming by any definition because it is done without the intent of sexual abuse, as a child expert said.
To sexually abuse each child.
Yeah, to sexually abuse each child, excuse me. Experts in psychology and child development said they are not aware of any evidence showing that increased exposure to LGBTQ people or topics makes children more likely to join the queer community. Instead, they said it's likely an environment of increased acceptance allows people to be more open openly consider whether they may be part of the LGBT community as a whole. Now, here's the thing, to be very clear, this is their goal. The reason why conservatives do not want discussions about queerness, this is why the Don't Say Gay bill exists. This is why they're doing all the things they can. They want us to be invisible. They want us to disappear. This goes under the fascistic notion not only of machismo, that is anything that is not cis het white masculinity is just basically shoved down, but also the fascistic notion of newspeak. That is, fascists like to control the language so that they can basically take away the language of experiences they don't like. If no kid ever saw queer representation in cartoons or shows or things like that, it would be much harder for them to have the language to come out as queer themselves if they were indeed queer. Let me see if you all can hear this. Tell me if this makes sense.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' press secretary Christina Pushaw was not happy that critics had nicknamed a controversial Florida law the Don't Say Gay law. She retorted by deploying a term that quickly became a political grenade of its own, grooming. The bill that liberals inaccurately call Don't Say Gay would be more accurately described as an anti-grooming bill, she tweeted in early March, referencing the measure that prohibits classroom instruction on issues of gender identity and sexual orientation in kindergarten through third grade. For decades, the word grooming has been associated with sexual abuse, child sexual abuse in particular. David Finkelhor, director of the Crimes Against Children Research Center and sociology professor at the University of New Hampshire, defined it as a set of behaviors and manipulations that adults use to make it easier to introduce and complete sexual interactions with a child, without having to use physical force. Grooming might involve gift giving, taking a child on special outings, focusing attention and compliments on appearance, or providing a child with special privileges. It is typically aimed at one or very few potential victims, not a group.
Yeah. So again, that's the definition of what grooming is in the context of CSA. Nothing about learning about LGBT identities fits that definition, right? Unless you believe inherently that LGBT identities are inherently somehow degenerate or wrong, in which case, then we have a much different discussion.
What it does not refer to is the kind of activity that Florida's measure now prohibits, instruction that touches on topics of sexual orientation or gender identity. This narrative is rooted in past anti-gay movements. The weaponization of the term grooming is tied to a history of long-standing false claims that gay, lesbian and bisexual people and men in particular molest children at higher rates than people who are not LGBTQ. Research shows that the idea is false.
Yep. Yeah. All research in this area, this idea that inherently like we are degenerates and we supposedly do all this harm, that is just not the case. There's no evidence to suggest that whatsoever. In fact, if I remember the data clearly, and I'd have to look at it again, actually individuals who tend to reify traditional gender roles tend to have higher rates of this stuff. So arguably speaking, again, this falls more to conservatives.
Misusing the term grooming revives this old, harmful falsehood, experts said. But in the wake of Florida's law, Pushaw and others have used the term to imply that people in the LGBTQ community or even just those who discuss LGBTQ topics are deliberately preying on children by discussing sexual orientation and gender identity. The suggestion is that these concepts force students to question their gender and sexual orientation, even if they otherwise wouldn't have. When did our public schools, any schools, become what are essentially grooming centers for gender identity radicals? Fox News host Laura Ingraham said on her March 9th show, "As a mom, I think it's appalling, it's frightening, it's disgusting, it's despicable."
I could say the same thing about you. Laura, just saying. So again, we get into this idea that, again, the misuse is being weaponized for this purpose. And again, Tiamat, actually, the one thing I will correct you on, you said, if anything, I expect a lower level of incident, even if asexuals aren't taken into account. A lot of us have had bad experiences in our youth that we deliberately avoid recreating. I don't think that's the reason. The thing is, we've seen the fact that people who tend to be, defined as pedophiles, in a lot of cases, will often go for targets who aren't even related to their sexual orientation. So a person who identifies as hetero and may not actually experience any type of the necessarily like homosexual attraction to adult men, may still prey on young boys. I know that's an uncomfortable topic for some, and please be careful with yourself here. Trigger warnings all around. But again, remember, CSA is about power and it is about harm. And the thing is that it doesn't operate like a sexual orientation because it is not one. Okay? You cannot frame it under those same terms. So I know there's been an attempt by some people to look at it that way. I understand that because, again, the idea being is some people are just born with this and plagued with it, and those people should be helped and supported as long as they don't act. We've made that argument before. But again, it is not by what I would put under my definition as a sexual orientation.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
This is why conservatives, when they talk about like, well, if we allow men to marry men, what's the next step? Like, well, because one is involving consenting adults and one isn't. These are very, very different. At some point, we may talk about a particular former clinician, now coach, that made that argument among many other dumb ones and sells essential oils, but that is not a tonight thing.
Jennifer McGuire, professor in the Department of Family Social Science at the University of Minnesota, said that perspective stems from an underlying desire to separate people who are different and to characterize them as less than or as evil. So it's a new form of homophobia and transphobia, or it's maybe the same old form but with new language.
True.
PolitiFact decided to consult experts and data to address the questions these grooming claims raise. What does research really say about children, LGBTQ topics, and how they respond when they are exposed to gender-diverse concepts? And how does that compare with data on grooming as it applies to child sexual predators?
Okay. So this next section is referred to as what is grooming and who typically fits the profile. Again, this stuff's really important because if we're going to be talking about this, if these idiots are going to be trying to claim that anybody who's queer falls into these lines, we want to know exactly what the definition is because we need to be able to push back on this. Andrew in YouTube chat, sorry I was looking, but yeah, no, I generally think anytime an accusation comes from a conservative, it's usually a admittance of some type of guilt. So let's look at these definitions and try to understand this because we want to be able to have good arguments to push back on these folks.
In recent years, grooming has been used to describe the actions of people such as former USA Gymnastics Dr. Larry Nassar, who sexually abused hundreds of gymnasts, many when they were children, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who was found guilty of several charges including sex trafficking a minor for her role in financier Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring. Abusers employ grooming tactics to gain a child's trust and often that of their family. They may share secrets with their victims. They often engage in casual physical contact before escalating it to something violating. They are commonly people who are already inside the child's circle of trust. RAIN, an anti-sexual violence advocacy group, says grooming can take different forms and that there are a number of warning signs.
So again, this is a directly predatory activity. There's a person working to get this kid's trust. There's an escalation of behavior slowly but surely, even possibly like working on the parents because you want the parents to put down their guard. This is by definition predatory activity.
Credible research gives no indication that these behaviors are more often associated with people who identify as LGBTQ than those who do not. To the contrary, studies of child sexual abuse have revealed that most child molesters identify as heterosexual, according to the Zero Abuse Project. Abuse is about power, not sexual orientation or desire, experts say.
Yeah, so again, you can look at this is a very interesting thing. As Tiamat said, though for a different reason, people who are members of the LGBT actually show up way less than this. Now, is it arguable that someone theoretically could be both LGBT and someone who is a child sexual abuser? Yeah, it's possible, but the likelihood is much higher if somebody is heterosexual. Right? So what does research show about child abuse in schools?
Carole Shakeshaft, a professor of educational leadership at Virginia Commonwealth University, studies sex abuse by adults who are employed in schools. She said research undermines the idea that LGBTQ people working in school settings pose a significant threat to children. School employees who perpetrate child sexual abuse are most likely to be white, heterosexual, male adults, her work shows.
Yep.
gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans people are less likely than people who do not claim those labels to commit child sexual abuse in school settings, she said. Shakeshaft also said research has shown that most of the adults who target children of their same gender identified as heterosexual or were married or living with someone of the opposite gender.
If somebody is gay or lesbian, bisexual, trans, are less likely to be abusers. And again, the people in general were usually heterosexual and were or married or living with someone of the opposite gender. Again, this is just by definition how this stuff works. This is what our data shows. Zonlik in chat asked, so this is something I'm trying to grapple with. This is a reoccurring issue of it's an individual, not a group. But when does that change? Where is our tripping point that says X group is often associated with X action? I mean, that's a really easy one, Zonlik. I mean, we're looking at it as data. When you see a population is more likely to engage in a particular type of harm, I think that it's important to look at those demographics and go, okay, this group is much more likely to do this type of harm. That doesn't mean it's impossible the other direction. But I guess the thing is that I guess I don't understand where the individual is coming up from, because again, there's a difference between looking at individual situations and the people that are involved with them versus looking at larger demographics and how these groups work. I guess I don't understand the context. Let's see. One-Eyed Heathen said, Tiamat, I agree that addressing specific individuals and their concerns is a great way to argue, but very often we are dealing with the whole rather than the ability that each conservative. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think that you can do both. I don't understand this like adversions one way or the other. From an integral perspective, you should be able to do both the subjective and intersubjective arguments. So I guess I don't know. What is the difference between grooming and teaching about sexuality?
Well, at least right now, we're specifically refuting claims that are being made. Like, when we're talking about this data in particular, it's not necessarily to, assign blame to, individuals, but we're refuting claims about the LGBT community that are being spread as part of, a smear campaign by conservatives. So...
Because again, conservatives have one joke and one tactic. It's to paint the person that they dislike as an individual who is harmful somehow to society, whether that is because of quote unquote black crime or because of, illegals coming over the border or, LGBT people are by definition going to harm the children somehow in some vague, not spoken way.
Well, and this stuff as well also makes for a really effective smokescreen, yep. Right? It keeps your attention focused on stuff that is just nonsense. We know it already. Everybody knows. I hope lots of people know it. And certainly professionals in data already know this stuff. But we still have conservatives putting up a really big, smokescreen with this. And it absolutely makes it possible for them to get, other legislation through, other continued, getting crappy things through the government and keep pushing this narrative. And yeah.
No, absolutely.
Teachers using gender-inclusive reading material and lesson plans are not, by definition, grooming children.
True.
Nor is Disney by dropping gender-specific pronouns from park greetings or featuring movie characters who challenge stereotypical views of sexuality and romance. If we were just talking to kids about gender identity and sexual orientation and issues like that, we were not doing it with the goal of eventually sexually abusing a child, said Victor Vieth, Chief Program Officer for Education and Research for Zero Abuse Project. In fact, the goal may be to prevent sexual abuse because we know that children in the LGBTQ+ community are at higher risk to be abused for a wide variety of reasons.
I love that it tried to pronounce it as a word instead of an acronym. Well done, bot. But that's true. Yeah, kids that are LGBT are much more likely to be victims of this because they are often vulnerable. That is, they're easier to isolate. Kids that are often kicked out, such as trans kids, are often, booted out of their house, etc. No, this.
Oh yeah, when you're in a position where you are in need of some kind of supportive adult, right? And sure enough, a supportive adult comes along, and that person may not have good intentions. It's a problem. That's absolutely the thing. I think the big thing too is that, as you're listening, this is especially important because I notice that a lot of people don't really understand the stuff around with abuse and CSA and how this stuff works and function. And I actually think this is a really great article kind of walking you through like the steps, the warning signs, things to watch out for as well. So I hope that for at least on a personal level, if you are, LGBT or know somebody who is, like, this gives you better stuff in your own mind to be like, no, I don't need to listen to all the conservatives. I don't need to worry that there's something wrong because here's how this actually works, right? Because I think a lot of this stuff is that when you're hearing so much of it from different places, it is kind of done in a way where they want to kind of just get it in people's heads like brain worms. They just kind of want to get it there. They kind of want this to be, this keeps on being, the thing that you see over and over and over again. All right.
Well, absolutely. And again, even look at the way conservatives handle this stuff. A good example of this would be is, like, again, their argument recurringly seems to be that parents should have the choice, parents should have the choice, parents should have the choice. And yet they are passing laws to restrict these kids from ever transitioning. One, because they don't understand that parents are often involved in that medicalization process. But two, the hypocrisy, or at least the idea, is that they don't really actually care about the parent's choice. They just want to hurt trans kids.
Yep.
Like, again, so we have the next section. Could discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity persuade a child that they are non-binary, transgender, gay, or queer?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yep.
Another reading of the grooming narrative as Pushaw and Ingram have applied it suggests that, over time, children might be taught to or coerced into claiming an LGBTQ identity as their own even if they otherwise wouldn't have. There is no evidence of that, and it points to a fundamental misunderstanding of human sexuality and gender identity. Experts said they were not aware of any research or evidence that increased exposure to topics such as gender and sexuality makes people more likely to join the LGBTQ community. Instead, they said, it is likely an environment of increased acceptance allows children to more safely and openly think about, question and discuss their gender identity and sexual orientation.
True. Again, I just gotta say this to people. Like, let's use adults as an example because people get weird about the kid stuff. Let's talk about this. Let's say you're like a 22-year-old, like you just graduated undergrad, and you find out about gay people. Like, you have to watch, you watch a bunch of shows and there's a lot of gay people. Do you think that heterosexual 22-year-old is just going to suddenly crave dick? Like, maybe if he has some bisexual leanings, but generally speaking, knowing about the existence of gay people or LGBT people or whatnot doesn't make you just start deliciously craving dick unless there's already a sort of pre-established desire for, dick.
Or, yeah, right? Something you've been bearing for a while.
Yeah.
Well, and this is why, tying it back in, Jess and I have talked a little bit about emergent self-schema, right?
Yep.
There seems to be a couple different things going on. There seems to be a very much innate sense of your gender or sexual orientation. Wow, thanks everyone.
Continue your thought, Kisses. Look away from the chat.
I'm gonna banish chat if you're not careful. So anyways, there seems to be an innate sense of, gender and also sexual orientation. Just something that is there, and we know this from, kids who are very, very young could, as young as like 3 or 4 even, somewhere in that range, like go, hey, I'm not the gender you said I was. I'm a boy or I'm a girl. They can say that despite, not having been in an environment that gave them the options, right? Or taught them that there was, a possibility to be that way. Somehow they still knew. And just like throughout your life, and not just like at the same time throughout your life, you are constantly building up more and more experiences, learning more about yourself, learning how you interact with the world, taking in different messages from the world. And so both of these things are going on at once, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where we're kind of seeing the emergent self-schema. And so when they try to tell you that, you're magically going to become LGBTQ, well, no, probably not. There's probably several things that are, getting you there. And some of it's a very innate sense. And for those of us who are trans or LGBT, in some format, no, we know that there is something innate here. Like if somebody tried to make me not, into girls anymore, I'd be like, what are you doing? Like that's not happening. Trust me, people have tried to tell me I'm not a lesbian, all right? I take trans masks, but the part of me that's in relationships still it still kind of craves the femme side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you can't fucking change that. So, I mean, and that's not to say that people can't shift, throughout their lifetime.
Well, that's what I was going to
There are shifts that can happen to people for sure.
Well, and I actually want to go piggyback off that because, again, when we talk about emergent self-schema, what people seem to get lost on is they think that, again, they're operating in a non sort of Zen psychology perspective. That is a wrong one. And that is that the ego is by definition impermanent. It is constantly changing. And so the internal self-schema of gender and sexuality is also subject to change. It is both innate, that is, it appears to be pre-established in the person for some reason, and it seems to morph and change depending on the understanding of the person because we better reify and understand how that works. I came out initially as a binary trans femme. I now identify as a non-binary trans woman because that's a better fit. There was that evolution. Zena initially identified in sort of a trans mass kind of way, but mostly non-binary, and then has sort of moved beyond that to more of a directly trans mask experience or sort of idea of like colorful idea of gender. The thing is that these are evolutions. These are changes. This is why we mean emergent, because emergent doesn't just mean this at a young age. You might have inklings, but you may not ever have that. There was someone mentioning in chat about the 90s. Same thing here. Without a proper environment where you are properly supported, you can have all the inklings you want, but you can't know shit. Look at Blair White. Blair White knew she was a girl at 5 years old. She's made that argument despite now making arguments there's no way a kid should know that they're a girl at 5, but whatever. But again, this is the issue, is that you are always constantly changing. We've talked about this with our bookmark identities video. Bookmark identities are a way to sort of frame in metaphor this idea of emergent self-schema as gender and sexuality, right? It's the idea that like your sexuality also can sort of shift, not in a way that is forced externally, but new information causes you to better describe it.
Right. Well, and I've had to explain this to parents that get weird about like their kids coming out. Like, one parent was like afraid that like her daughter who came out as lesbian was going to be like cutting herself off from like tons of experiences and not being able to do them. And I'm like, no, she's still like a young teen. She still has plenty of time to figure everything out. She's still going to be going through this, the same motions of exploring who she is. Like, that's all going to be a thing. Like, that didn't just magically disappear because she came out.
So Delirium VR from YouTube chat said, non-binary trans woman here also, but it took years to get here. I used to think that if I was NB, I couldn't be a man or woman. Lol, silly me. So real quick, as a side note about that, my argument to that would be very, very clearly that like there are several social factors as to why that may have been. And one of them tends to be is that I think sometimes we don't realize that, again, gender and sexuality is meant to be descriptive, not prescriptive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So being non-binary does not necessarily preclude oneself from being a man or a woman. It just means that there is something elsewhere about your gender that doesn't quite fit that system. 80 to 90% of me is, for the most part, femme. Very assertive femme, but very femme. But not all of it. Some of it is very much not that. And so the thing is that how do you account for that? Well, language is hard because description is difficult. The experience I'm having versus the words I use are very different. Again, Nietzsche referred to words as a Roman graveyard. The moment you've had an experience and you've tried to put it into words, you've killed it. So it's hard to use language to get to this stuff, so we do the best we can. So anywho, let's keep going.
Yeah.
So again, knowing these things do not necessarily lead to grooming in any way. And again, the idea that these things would lead you to be queer necessarily is nonsense.
Exposure to these topics does not change the way people develop, said the University of Minnesota's McGuire, who studies family relationships and gender identity and the health of transgender youth. It changes how they feel about how they develop, McGuire said. Accepting parents don't change whether or not their kid is trans, they change whether or not their kid hates themselves and gets kicked out of the house for being trans. True. The kid's transness is there regardless.
Yeah.
Yep.
The transness exists a priori to the parents' feeling about it.
That's true.
Does anyone else think this guy just looks crazy? Sorry, he looks like he's hiding bodies in the basement. Like this girl right here looks like she senses evil.
Clinton Anderson, acting chief of psychology in the public interest for the American Psychological Association, said thinking a child might somehow be persuaded to come out as gay or trans, for example, is a misunderstanding of how sexual orientation and gender identity develop. He said that different people have different levels of fluidity and variation, but a person's sexual orientation and gender identity are not easy things to change or alter.
True. You can have further clarifications. Again, that's the emergent aspect, but generally speaking, these seem to be set. Someone in chat said, let's see, I will admit I am anxious about the remove all labels idea. Yeah, no one needs to remove all labels. Yeah, you're being told you're a regressive trans woman. Those people are idiots.
So I've got a thing about, I did a whole umbrella series about labels, didn't I? Or a whole, episode. I wanted to be great. It was a vlog. It was somewhere. And again, we tackle a lot of, the prescriptive versus descriptive, right? Labels are really useful when they're, when you are using them to describe yourself and your experience. All right. Or if we need to talk at large about something. All right. Like our political queer movement. All right, cool. But prescriptive to, predefine it, give it boxes and place it onto somebody else
is fucked.
Is fucked and not great, right?
Well, it's where you get things like gold star lesbians. It's where you get the idea that non-binary people aren't real trans medicalists. This is what that is. Prescriptive leans to really weird shit.
Well, and we need our language to help learn about ourselves. We still need that. So doing away with all labels is not really going to help us, because it's going to land people back in the same place that we were at in a couple decades ago, where a lot of people just didn't have language for shit. The reason it took me so long to get to non-binary is because I didn't know that existed. I learned about trans women and trans men because that's what LGBTQ literature taught at the time. But non-binary wasn't really a thing until later, even though that was super what was going on. So,
Stokes' theorem, I do want to push back on something you said. You said ontologically evil, look at MFer. I will say that, again, I disagree with the idea of framing people as ontologically evil. Ontologically evil assumes that they are evil at the core of their being, that is, that they are cellularly evil. I think that's a bad idea because it is a deterministic idea that assumes they could do no different. If they could do no different, then they really can't be blamed for what they're doing. There's no responsibility in that world. I do not like determinism, and I do not like the idea that these people are ontologically evil. The term I tend to use is pathologically or dysfunctionally evil. That is, they know that they could do different. They choose not to. And I think that's where we hold them responsible for the harm that they do. Free will and choice are important in those discussions. If someone is ontologically evil, they're basically fucking Skeletor. So I will always push back on that term. I know Vosh is using it. I know a few other people are. I think this is a terrible idea.
I was going to say, as far as Kreese with saying agender and gender fluid language going back in the 90s, or there was the language for that, but yeah, non-binary is new.
Well, gender nonconforming was the language that was also used. Non-binary is a new term, but the idea that it pushed towards is not a thing.
Yeah, okay, I was still talking. It's okay.
Finish your thought.
I was just getting to the not everybody had access to it. So yeah, definitely there's definitely stuff around, but having access to it, even if it did exist, was another difficult part about it.
Yeah, and again, I think non-binary is a more newer term, but again, the difference is that at least from a clinical sense, we use the term gender non-conforming.
Well, and in some format, it's existed throughout history. Just different cultures and different time periods have different ways of interacting with that. So,
well, even mask dressing women in the Victorian age weren't necessarily trans men, right? Some of them were just in a weird middle ground, especially with the ladies they lived with, where they clearly weren't in some kind of relationship. It's not like a Saf one or friends thing at all, not at all. Anyway, so let's continue. Sorry for interrupting you, by the way.
It's okay. Thanks, love.
Clinton Anderson, acting chief of psychology in the public interest for the American Psychological Association, said thinking a child might somehow be persuaded to come out as gay or trans, for example, is a misunderstanding of how sexual orientation and gender identity develop. He said that different people have different levels of fluidity and variation, but a person's sexual orientation and gender identity are not easy things to change or alter.
So I want to play that again because I think that's the really important part. These are locked in.
What we do know is it doesn't look like there's much that changes it externally, Anderson said. The changes that happen seem to happen naturally because of how people develop, not because something is being done to them.
Yeah. So a good example of this was I've said before that one of the things that gave me the courage to actually transition was Natalie Wynn, right? ContraPoints. And one of the things I think is really important is that is the case. The fact of the matter is that it's not like Natalie made me trans. It's that Natalie presented a opportunity to be trans in a way that wasn't too scary for me or wasn't so adversive to my way of thinking. There was persuasion as far as understanding that transness is okay, but my own transness was something that was a part of me, not something she did to me.
Just to be clear as well, because I do hear occasionally bad faithing, not from our community, but just in general on the internet. But like, this stuff doesn't preclude anyone from being really fluid in their feelings of gender or sexual orientation. Like, being fluid is in here too. Just that stuff from the outside isn't going to suddenly come and be like, you're this completely other thing that you're not feeling or experiencing. That's all we mean.
Yeah.
Again, gender fluid, you know, some kids float between, you know, bi, pan, or varying degrees, or somewhere, you know, or other orientations. It's all good.
What does data show about the number of young Americans who identify as LGBTQ?
Survey studies show that an increasing number of people identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or non-binary. Gen Z adults, those born between 1997 and 2003, seem to be driving the increase, according to a recent Gallup poll.
Pog.
But Anderson and McGuire both said that such an increase doesn't mean there are significantly more LGBTQ people. I've not seen any evidence to suggest that a safer environment makes people more gay or more trans, said McGuire. I would expect that what it does is allow people to talk more openly about it, and I have seen evidence about that. There is limited historical data on the LGBTQ community because it was rarely collected and it was often unsafe to disclose such information. People's identities sometimes vary throughout their lives, which adds further complexity.
Yep. Yeah.
Or that information got fucking burned. Quite literally in
some cases, yeah.
And especially see history with like World War II, I think. For sure got some places definitely burned down.
To answer chat things, yeah, the dysfunctional evil is
okay. I really don't want to get stuck on this because we got a whole thing last stream about it.
We do. We have a whole thing in the last stream. I appreciate that helped you. He-Man, yeah, no, Skeletor in the cartoon was just demonstrably evil. He was just evil at a core level. It wasn't until the actual updated He-Man thing in the aughts where they made him not that.
Okay, focus, chat.
I mentioned like one-off thing and they're just like...
For hundreds of years, McGuire said there was overwhelming social pressure not to claim LGBTQ identities, meaning that only people who simply could not claim their identity would claim it. Now, she said, there's more room for people who are maybe not as binary in their thinking about their identity to own an identity. Anderson said that the increase that is documented is probably driven, in part, by people choosing to claim an LGBTQ identity even if they could conceal it if their safety required it. People who come out are finding acceptance, and that makes it easier for them to find where they feel comfortable in terms of sexuality or gender, he said. But those people are not necessarily people who wouldn't be gay or lesbian, they just would not be admitting it.
True.
Yep.
Like, I wasn't not trans the whole time I was, like, not out. It was just... I was born in the 90s, and being a trans woman was terrifying.
So how much more of this do we have, or do we want to kind of...
So it looks like it's just wrapping up. This is just talking about the idea that, like... Again, the idea that this is by some way, and again, we'll have this in the links for people, but essentially misuse of the term grooming can prevent the identification of actual grooming and allow abuse to go undetected. We've said this. They go into this, again, talking about this idea that, again, representation exposure does not make someone gay or trans. What it does is give the opportunity for the person to know that experience exists and see if it's true for them. And the problem is again, fascists, i.e. conservatives, want to create a world where you don't get to talk about things because again, if you don't have language for an experience, you can't be it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there's another important piece that I want to bring up here too. So a lot of times, sexual orientation, gender identity, a lot of times this stuff will go into, if it's done well at any rate, or if the organization is able to, will go in with education about sexuality in general. Like this would just be part of that education training, which would be, age appropriate kind of deal. And we know from data that when kids have this education about these kinds of topics and have language around it, it in fact prevents sexual abuse because they can actually talk about it, they can report it, they know what to report, right? And that one's huge. Okay, so like this really messes things up on a lot of different levels.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and so again, the thing is that like the idea that making kids aware of LGBT people is going to somehow groom them, this is just a self-report. At the end of the day, we know conservatives are the ones who are more likely to do this. Heterosexual men are the much more likely to be, child sexual abusers. And again, I mean, statistically, again, hypothetically, the reality of this always comes down to the same thing. Someone like Ted Cruz is much more likely to be one of these abusers than anyone who's probably watching this. Right?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think that's good for me. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to do a little wrap up with this. So we're going over this article of information, kind of tackling these ideas. And one of the things that I would like people to get out of it is if you have conservatives or people who are kind of on this boat, how do you actually talk to them? What are some suggestions for that? Because there's a lot of pieces in this argument that I think are important. And my first suggestion is probably pick a topic, a singular topic that you think would be most effective, right? If they are getting stuck on the grooming stuff, explain, no, here's what grooming actually is. Here's how this actually functions. And here's how it's not the same, right? And just leave it at that, right? These sometimes these conversations can take a lot out of people. They can take a long time. So you may not even have time to get to all the LGBTQ side, right? But if you're talking to somebody and they're like, well, like, I don't really, like, aren't we just like transing kids and like kind of convincing them of this stuff? Like, aren't we doing that? If that seems to be their main through line, then no, tackle it with the data, associated with that, right? That we talked about here. And just, emergent self-esteem is something that we're kind of still piecing out, still kind of working through. There are a couple different theories about things, but so just probably reading up on stuff before you go trying to talk about it to other groups, right? Make sure that you know your stuff really well before having these conversations. I think that's number 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess the thing I'll say is just, you have to decide in these conversations whether the person's coming at it from a place of good faith. If someone's legitimately confused, it's okay for them to make mistakes as long as you have the mental wherewithal and the spoons to be able to deal with that. But where you get into problems is when this person is just unwilling or unrelenting. Like if you watch Hippy Dippy or another panel and you see someone just calling all LGBT people groomers, then we get into it. Then we get into a problem of there's no way this conversation can happen unless you're like going to be doing a direct debate or you think there's a way this can be useful for the audience that's watching. I would just say block and move on. So,
also if your housing or your basic needs are ever coming into question, and with people like, no, it's okay to just put the stuff on the back burner or just not deal with it. You need to take care of you first. Like we are always going to advocate for that. We know that not everybody is in a position to have these things, so it's probably the biggest one too. Is make sure that you're in a place where you can actually like have this with somebody as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the big stuff. Again, this is a really great article. I highly suggest reading all of it, reading it all through.
Yeah, go through and do another pass just so you guys have good arguments against this stuff. This is what the conservatives are going to use. It's the same thing they always do.
Yep.
So anyway, we'll see you in the next one.
Mm-hmm.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.